Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another video about our read-along of NobelWomen. For those of you who might have joined my channel just recently, I'm hosting a read-along in which we read a novel by a woman who won the Nobel Prize for Literature each month. There is a Goodreads group, I will leave a link to it down below, and there's also the reading schedule, and you can of course still join for next month. And I make a video on the last Sunday of each month in which I discuss the book that we read. And in February, we read Good Earth, The Good Earth by American writer Pearl S. Buck, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1938. Pearl Buck was born in Virginia in 1892, and she lived most of the first part of her life until 1934 in China. Her parents were missionary. She went to school there. She learned the local dialect, and she also had lessons in classical Chinese by a Chinese tutor. She went back to the US to go to university, but then again back to China to work there, and she returned, like I said, in 1934. Most of Pearl Buck's books are set in China. This one was published in 1931. And it is set in the late 19th century, so in the late 1900s until just before the revolution, so just before 1911 in China. Our main character is Wang Lung. And we follow his life. He is a farmer's son, and a farmer himself, quite poor when the novel opens, when he is a young man in his 20s. We don't know for sure, but looks like he's in his late teens, early 20s, until his old age, about 40 years later. Wang Lung, when the novel opens, is just about to get married. He had enough money to buy a wife, a slave woman working in a rich household, Lan, and he buys her as his wife. They have children. Later in the novel, Wang Lung also has a concubine or a second wife. We learn about the sons and one of the daughters, who is called the poor fool because she is mentally challenged, as we say now in PC language. And the novel really centers around Wang Lung's life on his farm and the importance of the land for him. He gets quite prosperous in the course of the novel, even though he has to endure hardship, but in the middle when there is a prolonged drought, and he and his family are close to starvation and have to move to the big city in order to work, to labor there, and to try to make a living there, but they return to the land later on. The novel ends then, because it's the first part of a trilogy, when Wang Lung is, as a prosperous old man, retired, so to speak, and he is afraid that his two sons might, sell the land, because for Wang Lung, the land is the essence of his life. Now, this was a reread for me, but it's been a very long time since I read it. I read most of Pearl S. Buck's books when I was quite young, in my late teens, early 20s, because my mother had all her novels, so I read them in German. And only later, when I was older and was able, when my English was good enough, I read them in English. I really enjoyed the reread. I liked the way, especially, that we get a portrayal of Chinese farm life around the turn of the century into the 20th century. And in our Goodreads discussion group, there were people who had problems with the fact, for instance, Olan, Wang Lung's wife, she not only was she a slave, she was bought by this rich household when she was a young girl, but she was also bought by Wang Lung, and you could say he raped her. There's also the issue of foot binding. In the beginning, Wang Lung is quite disappointed that Olan's feet are not bound, which was customary at that time in China. So in the discussion on Goodreads, there were people who were uncomfortable with the fact that these issues were not discussed. They were just shown. For me, that is one of the strengths of the novel, because I feel, but that's again my interpretation, I feel that Pearl S. Buck didn't want to judge. She didn't want to have this, American imperialist attitude towards the Chinese culture, even with respect to traditions that are clearly violations of the women's rights. For instance, that women are slaves. The Olan, the wife herself, calls her daughters slaves. They are not worth anything. Only the sons are really worthwhile having. And the same goes for the foot binding. It is not questioned and it is not discussed. But like I said, for me, that was the attitude of an American writer, having lived in China for a long time, being accustomed to the culture there, but doesn't want to put her Western values or Western judgment on that culture. And the same goes for the language. I read one comment in the Goodreads group that the language is not your typical, English. It sounds a bit, I agree, as if Pearl S. Buck was trying to imitate, quote unquote, sort of the Chinese way of talking. And some of the readers got really annoyed with that. But again, I felt that this was a way to show me, the reader, that I'm encountering, for me at least, a foreign culture. So through the writing, it was made clear that the people in the book are from a culture that I am not accustomed with. So I really like that. But I can understand that people might be put off by the writing style, and also by the fact that these human rights issues were not discussed or questioned in any way. But I can recommend this book if you haven't read it. If you want to read something about Chinese life in around the turn of the century, beginning of the 20th century, I still think it's really worthwhile reading. So this was it for my take on The Good Earth, our fourth read in the read-along NobelWomen. Let me know whether you read the novel and what you thought of it, either here or leave a comment on the Goodreads group. And like I said, if you just new, please look at the reading schedule and maybe you want to join. Our next read in March is Burger's Daughter by South African writer Nadine Gordimer, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1991. This was it for this Sunday's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, talk to me down in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.